Hello everyone, I'm Danielle and I'm a final year medical student, and I'm here with Professor Lillian Arts, who is the director of the Gender Health and Justice Research Unit, and is our resident expert on all legal things related to domestic violence, gender-based violence, and so on. We thought that we'd take this opportunity to speak a little bit about the Domestic Violence Act and some of the changes that we might need to look out for as junior doctors. Professor Arts, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think what's important to know is that we do currently have a Domestic Violence Act, and that act allows victims or applicants to approach the courts to get a protection order. And what that protection order does is it prevents certain acts of violence. So it's a real preventative measure rather than a measure that leads to the immediate arrest of the respondent or the person accused of violence. And I think some people are reluctant to use the act because they think that it will result in an immediate arrest, rather than more of a warning from the court, which says, if you continue the following acts of violence, then we will issue a warrant of arrest for your arrest. And I think there's just some uncertainty as to how that act works. So I think it's important that healthcare professionals understand what the remedy of the Domestic Violence Act is, and that it won't result in immediate arrest. I think a lot of people that come through our systems are worried about aggravating or provoking further violence. They are very acutely aware of what their risks are, their actual or perceived risks, and I think we need to respect that. And what the protection order does is it just puts something in place that says you have a right to appear, to address these accusations, and should the court believe, based on the papers or the application, and what I've heard here, we will finalize this order or we'll vary it to accommodate what the respondent or the accused has put forward to the court. The Act itself, at the moment, doesn't include any specific legal duties on healthcare practitioners. There is a section, I believe Section 2, which does imply duties because it orders the police to assist victims with obtaining emergency medical assistance. So the implication is there that emergency medical assistance will be supplied. But as we speak, there are currently reforms happening with the Domestic Violence Act, and a number of organizations are working nationally to submit submissions to the Department of Justice, and one of those issues is the role of healthcare workers. So I'm imagining that by the end of 2020, there will be more substantive duties on healthcare workers to respond. So those three duties very simply would be a very basic screening, asking very basic screening questions, some basic counseling, so you don't have to be a counselor, but just to help people disclose and to talk about the situations in which they find themselves, which doing your risk and assessment work, you've already established those skills. And of course, emergency medical treatment, which occurs in any case. So that's not going far beyond what we currently have.
Yeah.
It'll be quite prescriptive around providing information about support services. So whether you're working in a public or private facility, you will be under an obligation to know what those services are. And those can range from helplines such as the Gender-Based Violence Command Center that's run by the police, Lifeline or Childline, or it may involve a list of organizations currently and shelters within that community vicinity that can provide psychosocial counseling, assistance with protection orders and shelters. It will also probably involve ensuring that if there's any evidence of child abuse taking place in the home, that is reported to the South African Police Service or the Department of Social Development, though the mechanics around that haven't been finalized. But again, that's nothing that's not already in place as required by the Children's Act. So we're not moving far beyond. We're just aligning the two pieces of legislation so that they work nicely with each other.
So in terms of our current legal obligations, one of the big things that's always stressed is abuse of minors. Practically, or yeah, child abuse basically. And from a practical perspective, what does reporting that look like currently? Is that reporting it to a social worker, or in a sort of hospital setting? What do we do with that?
In a hospital, yeah, in a hospital setting, you will generally, and this is not in a clinic setting, you'll generally have a hospital social worker. So I think that's the first point of entry. The Children's Act and the Sexual Offences Act vary differently in terms of the nature of abuses that need to be reported and whom they need to be reported to. So it's important that healthcare practitioners familiarize themselves about, if they're presented with a case of child abuse, who the reporting bodies are, and if it's a case of, say, sexual violence versus child abuse and neglect, who those reporting bodies are. So it's not just there's some issues with the reporting, but even if you just did contact a social worker, they would refer you in any case and let you know whether it's a reportable offence to the South African Police Service. So I think that entry point, starting with DSD, is probably the way to go. Although there are expectations that it is reported to the South African Police Service, and the onus would be on you to make sure that that report happens, whether your entry point is the Department of Social Services or directly reporting yourself to the South African Police Service.
And do you think that hospitals in general have sort of policies about that in place, or will we need to find out what the system is for ourselves, depending on in which setting we are?
I think it's inconsistent across facilities. I am aware that, for instance, Grooteskier Hospital has its own policy in place. The social worker that I've spoken to there is very equipped to manage these cases and has a reporting protocol when she sees evidence of child abuse in particular. But I think the reforms in the Domestic Violence Act will be more informative to that end. And there'll be an expectation in the Act that the Department of Health does issue very clear instructions as to what that reporting mechanism is. And that'll plug all of the holes in terms of the uncertainties that we have in terms of what to report and whom. So I think the reform process is creating a lot more clarity about what those mechanisms are. And once those directives are issued, it'll be a lot clearer as to how the process will unfold.
Yeah. I think that will be great, because it's quite intimidating to know that you have a legal duty and an ethical duty to do something, but you don't really know how.
Correct.
So yeah, I think some clarity on that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think people are not so much worried about the reporting, but what the mechanisms for reporting are.
Yeah.
And of course, you're also dealing with issues of confidentiality in your care, of, you know, the possibility, I think we all do, of agitating an already volatile situation, particularly in domestic violence matters. So hopefully those directives, and we'll certainly work to ensure that those directives are abundantly clear as to what cases need to be reported where and by when.